Yeah, all right. Um, so one of the things, David, I thought about is just kind of looking at some of the a little bit of your history, some of the your origin, and really kind of coming back. I'm just going to go through of some different questions, a little bit about the orange, maybe about some of the potential client struggles, some breakthrough moments, something to do with maybe the technology and what you've found to be some great wins for businesses. So that's just kind of what this is. So as I go
Okay,
through, I'll just ask a question. Just feel free to respond and share your thoughts on that. And we'll just kind of
absolutely.
go through until we get through a few of these questions. And then we can do a couple of these sessions and look at maybe
Sounds good.
something like this every month to help us out with that.
Okay.
One of the things I'd be curious to know is what do most business owners misunderstand about technology decisions when they're getting into the realm of kind of when you start to meet with them?
Oh, that's a great question. We find a lot of business owners don't think through the technology stack and understand, hey, is this going to help me grow? Am I going to be able to scale my business with this technology? Do I have to keep adding piece after piece after piece that, just is going to cost me a grundle of money? Can I just use one single system? Do I have to have multiple systems? And a lot of them just don't know. They just don't understand. And so they end up selecting a technology that's 30 years old, and then they can't do half the things they need to do, and they're always behind other technologies that are emerging at that time. And they just don't know that, oh, wait a minute, it was this particular platform that we bought was built 30 years ago, which was built before the cloud technology even existed. So it does not play well with cloud technology. Oh, wow. And so then they end up realizing they just don't have a great solution. And it ends up being extremely painful because now you're going to spend a large sum of money to get that system to work the way you need it to work.
What would you think if you were just to give me a short list, really quick, rapid fire? Like, what would be some questions that they should ask that would help them better understand just that one component about is their software not only current, but is it solving their problems or going to be able to keep up with them in the future? Any thoughts on just really quickly questions that you would like to say, hey, if I were a business owner and I was looking at this, these would be some simple questions to ask.
Yeah, I would definitely be asking the help me understand how this software is going to enable me to keep up with the new technologies that are coming out. Um, as I grow from my current state to 5 times, how much is this going to cost me now? Now that I've grown, do I have to pay for every user, or can I just have unlimited users? Can I have 50 locations, and do I have to pay for every location? Or, does this software cover all locations? And can I have 20 different businesses and use the same system? Right. And those are all things that you should be asking, because you'll end up buying something that absolutely cannot keep up with the technology, and it won't allow you to scale and grow your business. And when that happens, you have to start all over again. And you might want to ask the hard questions early on, including, help me understand how this particular solution or platform will allow me to just grow uninhibited, um, and scale my business the way I want to.
That's great. What would you say? And I know that you've shared some of this based like, so, hey, here's one of the things they're not considering. Hey, here's some questions that they could ask themselves. And I know I've been part of a couple of recent conversations. What has been like, what's, and I don't want to say it's the worst thing. What's been the biggest problem that when businesses have come to you, in essence, they did not ask these questions? What would you say would be the number 1 or number 2 problems that they ended up falling into because they weren't prepped to ask those when they were trying to, move through a technology upgrade?
Yeah, most of them, they don't ask the questions about, the technology future. They don't ask the questions about, how will this plug and play with AI. They're not asking the basic questions as well as, hey, I plan on growing my business. I plan on hiring 200 people in the next year. How does this system, scale with me, and how much is it going to cost me, right? And should I be planning my budgets around, adding another $1 million in cost? And when you don't ask those questions, right, or you don't understand, you tend to make bad business decisions. And we run into it a lot where people buy a system, they implement it, and then they realize it's not going to work for them because technology is changing so quickly. And
Or
so
I've also
that
heard that they are still implementing it, right?
correct. Yeah.
Years later,
Yeah.
hours later, months later.
Yeah. I met with a company that's been implementing a system for 4 years now, still not live, and they won't be going live anytime soon. They're still another 2 years away from having their system implemented because it's, 46 years old. You have to program every little teeny tiny thing, where the new systems, it's plug and play, right? And so they figured they had to buy the big old system because they're such a big company. And the truth is that you can do far more with a small amount of server space in comparison to what you can do on those old systems. So there's definitely a economies of scale that come into play, where you're going to save a lot of money with a new system over an old system any day.
Gotcha. Here's another angle I'm curious to know. And again, before somebody comes and they decide that this is one of the big needs, technology, whether it's an ERP or one of the things I hear is that there's a lot of data silos, right? People have these fragmented systems, so then there's a
Yeah.
lack of confidence, right, in the data that they have. What's the one decision that most companies delay, but really shouldn't delay when you kind of begin to meet these companies?
Yeah, most of them think, oh, when we get to a certain, dollar amount, we're going to go ahead and implement a system to help us scale and grow. I had one particular customer that from the day one, they bought the system before they started having revenue, and they wanted to be able to scale and grow their business. And by year two, they're a $185 million company that has no inhibitions because they have a system that can scale. and and so they having them understand that if you buy now, your cost is a lot lower than if you grow, another 5 million or 20 million or 60 million or 100 million. Your costs go up because now you have a lot more to implement. But if you do it from the very beginning, you end up saving yourself all the headache and the heartache and the trouble, and then also the extra cost of having to implement a complex business with a system that can expand and grow and scale your business.
Oh, that makes sense. Definitely could be a pretty big impact. I know that I have been through that before in the past as well when we were looking at what technology, and it's a combination, right? Because what
Yeah.
were we doing? What did we think we needed to do? And was that going to be something that allowed us to continue to facilitate future growth, right? Across the entire company, not just one of the sections, which is another thing I think a lot of people think about, or, and this is completely off topic, sometimes the decision makers that sit around the table, instead of looking at, and to me, I feel it's really important to create and have curiosity, right? What would everybody's perspective be so that we can understand and get the right perception? Because I've heard too many times there's a person, and that one person's opinion might drive things, but they're not asking or not opening the door or trying to understand, right, where they're at or the technologies and the differences. And so like some, I call it like strong arming, right? One person's going to say, we're going to strong arm this business into this decision. And
Yeah.
good or bad, I think that's, there's an opportunity to hear from others around the table. Maybe share with me a time when you've been a part of that conversation and what your recommendation would be for an owner who is starting this process, looking into technology so that they can go in with the blinders taken off and or help other team members take blinders off. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah. So typically what we'll try and do is help them understand that if you're looking to adopt a technology to run your entire business from point A to point Z, then you need to understand, where you're going, what you're going to do, and adopt a solution that will allow you to do point A to point Z without any problem, right? Most of them will go point A to point D, and that's what they buy. And then you're like, whoa, wait a minute. You just spent a whole bunch of money on a system that's only going to last you for 6 months. You're going to have to totally adopt a whole new system 6 months from now. Well, we're saving money. No, you're not. You just wasted a whole bunch of money. Find the right solution and get it in place so that you have no inhibition on the technology side, on your growth side, on your, your vision side. And, I call it the planting, the growing, and the harvesting, right? If you have to stop in the middle of planting because you ran out of seed, or you have to stop harvesting because you ran out of machines to be able to do the harvesting, it's a total game changer. And so we try and help companies recognize that when I make a decision, I need to understand A, the consequences of my decision, and B, the circumstances surrounding my decision, and C, did I make a decision that is going to allow my company to scale and grow, and do exactly what we need it to do? Or did I buy something I'm going to have to turn around and pull the roots out and rebuild completely, 3 years from now, 5 years from now?
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. That made me think. I'm just picturing a boardroom, or you're in a conference room, right? You've got people surrounding the table. And I want you to think about this. I want you to think about the emotions if you're sitting in there, and let's say there are three, my mind went 3 to 5 to 8, but let's say it's 3 to 6 key people sitting around the table.
Mhm.
And there's David full of wisdom. And you're like, hey, these people are starting this technology journey. And I want to say, think about your grandma. Now, here's what I need to tell you. Like what's your like leaving desire, that if you were to sit there and look them in the eye, what would you tell them as they began this technology journey? Now, again, I know we've talked about several different things, but if you're telling me, I'm sitting around that table and you're
Mhm.
wanting to connect with me about this process, what is probably the most important thing that you feel that I need to leave that table with as I begin this search for my next technology, my roadmap of what will be my technology here over the next, 3 to 5 years, et cetera. What's your David wisdom that you want to impart to us around the table?
Yeah, I think, we find companies who pigeonhole themselves into systems that cannot scale, cannot grow, cannot change and adapt when the market changes, or your business needs to reinvent itself. Then you have to go buy a whole new system. You got to start all over again. Because a lot of companies, when they're, in their younger years or their younger phases, they don't think about, what if we have to pivot? What if the economy changes and we need to pivot and move to a completely different type of business? Can our systems pivot with us? Can they help us make the changes? Can they help us, move in the right direction? And or do we have to go out and, spend a whole bunch of money to get a whole new system in place to be able to manage what we're going to do? And a lot of companies don't think that far ahead, right? They're thinking about A and B and maybe C. But when you're thinking about the big picture, it's adopting it's adopting the right technology that will not get old, does not become dilapidated 5 to 7 years down the road. And it has a long-term future and outlook for, growth and for vision, as it adopts and adapts to changing technology. So I would be saying, look, you really need to think through the decision process and why it's important to select a technology platform that's not going to get old. It's not going to, become, what we call the next great plains that was invented when the pioneers crossed the plains, right? And now, there's a lot of companies using that old system and they can't get off of it, right? And because they basically threw their whole soul into it, and at the time it was probably a pretty good decision. But now that it's 40 plus years old, it's probably time to take a look at a new system. And nowadays the way the systems are being built is completely different. At least the ones that we represent are. We try not to represent systems that are going to get old, because you're doing a disfavor to the company that's bringing you in to help them understand what they should be buying, what they should be utilizing to grow their business if you sell them something that's 30 years old. That's just a disservice. And I would never sell a 30-year-old piece of software to somebody, and nor would I buy a 30-year-old piece of software for one of my companies. New technology, innovation, and the ability to utilize AI applications to improve your business, you got to have a system that can do it. You can't have an old system that is going to require $1 million to make it actually think appropriately in today's world.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let me just kind of reiterate. There's a few things as you mentioned that stood out to me. One, as you mentioned, market change. I think that's an interesting one, right? The dynamics of a market, even if it's one that you're in, and I work with several businesses, and some of them have seasonal changes. Some of those are political. We know that there's those types of effects. Some of those, like one of them, tariff driven, right? And
Yep.
so I just go back to market change. There are things that surround a business. So what are they considering that has to do with the market? The other one I thought you mentioned that's really critical to this is the business pivoting.
Yeah.
And I like to say, and as I've worked with different companies, the bigger the size the boat is, right? The bigger this company, then the slower it is to turn. And
Yep.
often, if there's a market or a need for a business pivot, that can cause danger. And you're talking about that with software. So you're like, hey, does my software allow me to have the flexibility within my company if there are interesting or unique changes within the market?
Yep.
Two is, let's say I have a business that I need to pivot. And one other thing too is you mentioned flexibility. So not only business pivot, but even as you scale and grow, are we adding other entities? Are we bringing in other side? Are we in business acquisition? So there's this whole component that has to do with flexibility that I think is a
Yep.
great question that a lot of people, even if they're not doing that today, that does not mean that that's a consideration that shouldn't be made in 1 to 3 years, or it might be in 3 to 5, or, et cetera. The other one I thought about that you mentioned too that I really liked was the big picture. Really
Yep.
just saying, hey, can we step back so that we can see a bigger picture? And to your point, when we're running business day to day, a lot of us, right, we kind of get in because we're having to navigate on the streets. However, let's step back and take a look at the map of the city and potentially state and even higher, right? What perspective are we looking at this in order to make the decisions? One of the questions I had asked before is if we have these people around the table and we end up with key team members that are either strong arming or not asking because we're not curious. I feel like that is a non big picture. And I've heard and through some conversations with you is some decisions get made because it was also the old way of doing things.
Yep.
And I think that's a whole other conversation about people
Oh, yeah.
being stuck in what was yesterday or last year or heck last century's efforts. And then you mentioned right tech and future growth. And so those were a few things that I really stood out to me when you kind of mentioned those key pieces.
Yeah. Can't tell you how many times I've had someone say, "Hey, we want new software, but we want it to work like our old software."
Explain to me why might that be a broken thought? Open that up for us, crack that nut for me.
Oh my word, Nathan. Yeah. So there's a reason why new technology comes into being, right? Because the old technology just isn't that good. And as time goes by, it becomes very dilapidated and it no longer serves its purpose. And so when they say, "Hey, I want to buy this inventory system from you, but I want it to do the exact same thing my old inventory system did," and you're thinking to yourself, well, what about best practices? What about improving the way you do your business versus just doing it the same way you've always done it? And many times we'll ask them, "So why are you doing it that way?" And they'll say, "Well, that's the way we've always done it." Okay, is there a better way possibly to do that? I don't know. We don't think about those sort of things. We just simply do it the way we've always done it. That's our tribal knowledge. That's what we do. That's our company. We're 70 years old this year and we just do everything the same way we did 70 years ago. Well, that makes perfect sense to someone who doesn't understand anything about business, right? Because if you're not constantly changing and adjusting, to the latest technology, you become irrelevant very quickly. And you find yourself saying, "Hey, maybe we should have reinvented ourselves 5 years ago instead of wasting our time trying to grow a business that wasn't going to grow because our technology is so bad." Right. Um, I had a conversation today with a company that, they've only been in business 7 months, but they're already doing $7 million a quarter in business, and they were like, yeah, we're struggling. Well, why? Well, because we're using spreadsheets. Oh, why don't you have a system to track and manage your inventory and your sales? And well, we can't afford it. Really? What's your EBITDA? I mean, how much are you making right now? And well, we're clearing about 1.7 million every quarter. I'm like, okay, so you have plenty of money to get a system. It's not like the old systems out there where you got to pay 30 million to get a system and it takes 5 years to do it. You can spend a lot less money, a tenth or even less on getting a new system and getting it in place to actually take care of that work. And it was a very interesting conversation because they're like, well, maybe we should have a conversation about that. Yeah, we should probably do more than have a conversation. We should probably do more than that. If you're growing that fast, you really need a system that can scale with you and that will manage all that growth, because I'm pretty sure you're a mess right now. And she was like, yeah, we're kind of a mess right now. So
Wonderful. Thank you. Let me move to kind of another category, and it has to do with breakthroughs. And I'm curious to know if you can think about some of the experiences you've had with the different businesses. What's one small shift that a company made with your help that had a surprisingly big impact? Can you think of any one of the businesses that you've worked with where that seemed like there was maybe the smaller shift that they had made with your help, and again, that made a pretty surprisingly big impact?
yeah, we had one particular customer that had 14 people working in their AR and their AP departments and their finance group. And we showed them how the new systems could automate a lot of that work. And at first, they were not wanting to change because they were like, well, then that means we may have to fire some people. And I kept telling them, well, no, there's actually another way to look at that. So, do any of those people have talents that you could utilize working on your business versus working in your business? And if so, you should identify them early, because when you adopt the system and start using it, it's going to automate the vast majority of the manual labor that those people are doing. And so you have an opportunity here to take those people and repurpose them within your company to work on your business, not in your business. And and to watch them go through that metamorphosis, right? To change, to adopt a new technology that automates a lot of the hard work that was being done manually. They realized quickly, wow, we can better utilize the talent that we have to work on our business and stop just working in our business. And that's when you can really grow a company and scale it, is when you're taking good people and you're moving them from manual labor into thinking and growing and adding value and figuring out new ways to do things and utilizing systems to make it happen. So, a lot of times companies will say, well, this is just too expensive. It costs too much. I'm like, okay, so how much do you pay this employee in this department each year? Well, about 120,000. Okay. And how much do you pay this employee? About, 85,000. So if you could replace all of those with something that costs you $3,000 a month, how much money is it costing you to actually get this new system? And they're like, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. And the whole idea is not to necessarily replace people, but to get them working on things where they can bring additional revenue to the company. They can, give new insights to the company. So it's amazing to see what happens when companies catch the vision and they start adopting and adapting to this new line of thinking, that I need to have more people working on my business than I have in my business. And if I can automate things, it makes it so easy for me to go ahead and make an adjustment to working in the business to working on the business.
I think that's an interesting whole different way of seeing things. To your point, you come through and somebody's like, "Hey, we're gonna have to do a few things because our technology is all over the place, and we want to bring it together." And you're like, "Hey, we can start to solve these problems.
Yep.
We can eliminate this." And they're like, "I don't know, because that means we'll have more time for our like." I know you and I have talked in the past about cost, or cost centers or profit centers, and when you start talking about taking those resources in order to repurpose that, to your point, to be working on a business, that feels like that should make sense to a lot of people. But I'm also wondering how many of them, because they're always working in, there might be this discomfort of, oh, well, what would we do or how would we keep them busy? And to your point, maybe it's just cost savings. Like, at the end, that's not necessarily always the key thing, but it's a great benefit if
It,
that potentially becomes something.
yeah, it's a great benefit. And, what we find is companies have people in their organization typically that are what I call kingdom builders. They want to hire as many people as they possibly can to make themselves look important. And instead of hiring people for what they need, they hire people for what they need. They need to be a kingdom builder. They need to be seen as the guy who hired 70 people and he grew this, this whole department. And I kind of smile a lot when I hear people say that, yeah, I just grew this department to 70 people. And what'd you do? Well, we did marketing. Hmm. How many people do you need for marketing? Right. And just want to ask the questions. So how much money did you spend and what were you spending it on and why and what was your return on your investment and you start asking questions about ROI and they start going, well, we didn't really increase sales, but we did, and we have a huge department and it's amazing, right? And so uh, for growth's sake, right, kingdom builders, they never help companies grow, they help companies spend money. And that's really what kingdom builders do. So
Let's just dig into that quickly. Small bit advice: if you have two people sitting across from you, one's a kingdom builder, one's a company builder, what would be your thoughts, or what would be something you would just share to help provide them with some inspiration about thinking about maybe the business and the growth in the right way? What's something you would tell somebody as a kingdom builder versus a company builder? What's your advice for somebody like that?
yeah,
By the way,
yeah.
if somebody were to be listening to this, I think that's a great question: is, am I more concerned? And by the way, I think people would probably say, well, I'm trying to grow the business. To what end? And I love the word you use is your ROI, right? If I'm
Yeah.
spending, that's converting into what, right? So to me, again, is it a cost center part of the business, or is it actually a revenue generator? And but go ahead. What would be
Yeah.
your advice, or what would be your piece you would tell a kingdom builder versus a company builder?
Yeah. So for the kingdom builders, it's about them, and so you want them to understand this business that we are growing here is not about you. This is not about how many people report to you. It is about how well we can run our departments and how well we can do it without adding a fully burdened cost that the company cannot handle, which actually stymies the growth when you run out of capital. And so it's important to note, right, that kingdom builders typically grow companies out of business. They don't grow companies into business. Whereas someone who understands the value of starting a company, growing a company, and getting the right people on board and doing it in a way that you don't run out of money. You don't have kingdom builders. You have company builders. You have people who care about the business, who want to grow it, who understand the mission, the vision, and the values that you're espousing to, and that once they catch that vision, mission, and value, they move forward, and they ask themselves good questions on a regular basis. Do I absolutely need to hire another person? If so, why? Can I get by with adding a little bit of additional work to another person that's, currently seems to have enough time that they're on their cell phone a lot, right? And so you can simply look around and see, do I need to hire somebody new, or do I need to figure out how to be more in tune with what I currently have and to be able to fine tune it within what I have currently in my organization versus constantly adding people. And so I think, once you understand that the value of a business is improved dramatically by those who are building the business versus building a kingdom within the business.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. I think some really good advice to be asking ourselves, and we can decide where we might fit in that. And again, I only say this, David, because I think everybody would say, "Oh, I'm contributing to the business," right? But I do
Yep.
feel like the question is how. And I go back to, the efficiency and the use of people's times. And is it about people? No. To your point about the business and its output and its ability to create an impact in their industry slash generating revenue, right? Without doing that, the businesses aren't going to continue. I wanted to shift a little bit to part of what PTP does, what Premier Tech Partner does. It's a little bit different in essence, your framework. So how would you describe your unique approach or the approach that Premier Tech Partner has in order to help businesses grow through technology?
I appreciate that, Nathan. And we look at our business as a boutique business, and that boutique business is focused on helping companies to grow and to utilize technology to their benefit. As a company that's been around for 73, almost 74 years now, we've had to adapt, we've had to adopt, and we've had to change constantly in order to remain relevant. And, after 70 plus years in business, if you're still in business, it's because you changed. You did not stay status quo. You were constantly looking to adapt, adopt, and change. And so what we're trying to help companies understand is, we know what it means to adapt, adopt, and change with the right technology. We've helped a lot of companies do it. We have companies that are approaching their $1 billion valuation now, that started with us when they had 12 to 18 employees. Now they have 850 plus employees, and they're not building a kingdom. They're building a legacy. They're building a long-term business that they're going to be proud of, and they're going to be able to either take public and turn it over to a bunch of investors, or they're going to keep it private and do a family office, right? And what we do is we actually help them get a technology roadmap so that they can know where they need to go and which technologies will help them to get to where they want to go. And once we've provided that technology roadmap to them, it allows them to start making better business decisions. They can start to think about how the technology is going to impact the growth of their business over the next few years, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, 20 years, et cetera. And so we help them understand that. We then help provide guidance and growth opportunities. So we'll sit down with them and we'll go through, where they're going to be 2 years from now, 5 years from now, what their growth plans are, their business plans are. We'll help them to see some of the rocks that they may not be seeing on the shoreline, and help them to also understand that now that we know where you want to go 10 years from now, we can make sure that the technology is there with you. So we have the power to help, keep the innovation going, and making sure that they can adopt the correct technology to continue that growth. So I think that's the main thing, Nathan.
It sounds like, again, as you're mentioning that, is it's not just, and I hear this because I know as I've worked with you and I've seen some of the businesses that you've been with, some of them are like, hey, we can do a tech implementation, but when we're done, right? Like we're
Yeah.
hands off. We're gonna do a tech piece, and then you're on your own. And I think, one of the key differences that you've mentioned is you talked about, looking at seeing some of the rocks, and it's not a plan for now, it's a plan for 3 years, it's a plan for 5, it's a plan for 10. And you just shared an example of a couple companies that started off with, a small group of people. And as they've continued to build a business, this technology and what you've helped them do, in my mind, is help them, again, I like to say, as a guide, right? What you can do is you can help somebody along the path by helping them know and avoid the pitfalls, see the beautiful things, 'cause see what we want to see, avoid what we don't want to see, and get there with, in good spirits and in good good health, you can say.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be an arduous journey, and the goal, I think, when one thing that Premier Tech Partners does is simplify, bring that together, help organize, and then I love the whole future perspective, and then helping me along the way, not
Yeah.
just doing something and saying good luck to you on your own. And a lot of companies, I would say, that sounds like it's maybe like, I can do this. I don't know why any company would honestly want to be in that spot when you guys being at the top in the forefront of tech across everything. It's the ERPs, it's your hosting, it's add-ons, it's software. as a whole, as that facilitates growth. You talk about adding business and modules. You talk about, having a system that's in and on the cloud that works, that can keep up with technology. You mentioned AI. There's a lot of those things. I don't know why anybody would want to go that alone, if that makes sense. In
Yeah,
fact, I think that's where most companies have a problem, isn't it? They're like,
it
I've got
is.
this, or I can do what I need to do. Or we go back to the question of curiosity. They think they've heard something, but they're not willing to investigate or bring a group like yours to the table. And that sounds
Yeah.
like there's a couple things that make you quite different. What would be, if you were to list on your hand just 2 or 3 things that are specifically unique about what you are doing versus other groups that might be in this industry of selling software like you guys do?
Yeah, so as a full service tech, partner, we're providing all the services that they need to manage their technology, including the hosting. We also have the cybersecurity side, with our MSP, our managed service provider company. And so we're a true technology partner that allows them to focus on their business versus focusing on how do we secure our technology? How do we secure our data? How do we make sure we have enough users in our in our system? How do we add additional capability, functionality, and customizations in our system? They don't have to worry about those things. We can take care of that for them. And as a partner in technology, our goal is to make sure that our customers always have the technology that they need to scale, grow their business, and that they're not playing catch up, right? They're not going, oh, we should have made changes 5 years ago. We want to help them adapt and adjust as they go along their path. If they pivot one section of their business, we want to be there for them to make sure that the system will handle it and give them exactly what they need. So it is a moving target. Technology is constantly improving and changing, and if you're not changing with technology, then you are being left behind.
No, I can't. I believe I agree with 100% of all of that.
Yeah.
As you continue to move along, one of the last questions I'm curious to know is, what do you feel like over the next 5 to 10 years? What role do you feel that PTP is going to be playing in the growth of with the growth of your clients?
Hey Nathan, it looks like I'm losing you. I'm going to go plug in. My apologies.
Let's just do this. I think we're good for now, David. We can come back and we'll pick up on some of the other questions that are parts of this. And then there's another one that I want to do that has to do just more with who you are, David, and gathering some of the questions about you and your background and your history as well. This is good enough for now. That's what I just wanted to do, is to go through some of these. I'm going to highlight the questions I've asked. We'll come through and ask a potentially different set, but probably next time I'd like to do this in getting connected with you, just more on David, your history and where you've come from as well. That's
Okay.
good enough for me. Let's go ahead and conclude, and then we'll just pick back up and we'll schedule another time to kind of
I
continue these things. Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, David. Take care.
Thanks, Nathan.
Bye.
All right. Bye now.